He did not look at her. Not once. The occasion was their second wedding anniversary, a fact noted by every guest at Wren Court, and ignored completely by its master. The Duke of Wren Court, Alistair Blackwood, stood by the great hearth, his profile a severe and handsome line against the firelight, speaking to a neighbor about the damnable price of corn. He was a man carved from the stone of his own estate, enduring, formidable, and cold to the touch. His wife, Philippa, the Duchess, sat 10 yards away, a still point in the swirling eddy of conversation. She wore a gown of deep blue velvet that made her skin seem like porcelain in the candlelight, and a single string of her mother's pearls. They were her only adornment. The Blackwood diamonds remained in their vault, as they had since the day of her arrival. The county had assembled in the long gallery, a room designed for celebration. Gilt-framed ancestors looked down with impassive expressions, their painted eyes seeming to judge the living. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, roasted meat, and the cloying perfume of the county's unmarried daughters. It was a performance of prosperity, one Philippa knew to be as fragile as the spun sugar on the dessert trolley. Wren Court was old, and its bones ached with the chill of debt. Her marriage had been the poultice applied to that aching wound, her mercantile dowry a vulgar but necessary infusion of capital. It was a transaction, and Alistair had never allowed her to forget it. Later, when the guests were thick with wine and goodwill, the moment arrived. It was Lady Honoria, Alistair's sister, who prompted it. Her voice, always pitched for public consumption, cut through the low hum of chatter. "Brother, surely you have a token for our dear Philippa. It is your anniversary, after all." A silence fell. It was a trap, and Philippa felt the teeth of it press into her skin. Honoria was a mistress of such moments, of manufacturing social obligations that could only be met with discomfort. She stood beside her brother, her silver gown shimmering, her smile a perfect polished weapon. Alistair turned his head slowly. For the first time that evening, his gray eyes met Philippa's across the room. There was no warmth in them, not even polite acknowledgement. There was only a weary sort of finality, as if she were a column of figures he had just finished adding up. "Indeed," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I have been considering it." He did not move towards her. He did not produce a velvet box. He addressed the room, not his wife. "The Duchess has expressed an interest in botany, a commendable pursuit for a lady. Therefore, I am making her a gift of the old glass house at the far end of the walled garden." A confused murmur went through the guests. The old glass house was a ruin. It had been built by Alistair's grandfather, a man of extravagant and fleeting passions, and had fallen into disuse 50 years ago. A storm 10 winters past had finished it, shattering most of the glass and leaving a skeletal frame of rusted iron to be slowly consumed by ivy. It was a place of decay, an architectural ghost. It was an insult wrapped in the language of a gift. Philippa felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her composure. She had learned the art of stillness in this house, the discipline of a face that betrayed nothing. She saw the flicker of triumph in Honoria's eyes, the polite confusion on the faces of her neighbors. They did not understand what this meant, not precisely, but they understood the temperature of it. It was a public dismissal. "You are too generous, Your Grace," Philippa said, her voice even. She rose from her chair, the velvet of her dress whispering against the polished floor. She inclined her head, first to him, and then to the room. It was a gesture of acceptance, of perfect ducal propriety. She would not give them a scene. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She would take the ruin he had given her, and she would... What? She did not know. But in that moment, A cold, hard kernel of resolve formed in her chest. He had given her a broken thing, a place of endings. It was a map of her marriage. Very well. A map can be used to find a new direction. She would not be buried there. She retired early, pleading a headache. The excuse was so common among wives that no one questioned it. In her rooms, her maid, Bess, a silent, watchful girl from Philippa's home county, helped her out of the velvet gown. Bess's movements were gentle, her face impassive, but her hands, as they unhooked the dozens of tiny buttons, communicated a fierce and protective sympathy. She was the only witness to the slight, uncontrollable tremor in Philippa's fingers as she placed her mother's pearls back in their silk-lined box. Once alone, Philippa did not weep. Weeping was a luxury she had unlearned. Instead, she walked to the tall window that overlooked the gardens. The moon was high and cold, casting the long shadows of the yew trees across the manicured lawns. Far in the distance, just visible past the dark mass of the walled garden, she could see the silhouette of her gift, a jagged skeleton against the bruised silk of the night sky. He had given her a cage of broken glass and rusted iron. He thought he was giving her a place to wither, a symbol of her uselessness. He did not know that for the first time in 2 years, he had given her a purpose. He had given her a piece of Wren Court that was unequivocally hers, and she would not let it lie in ruins. The following morning, she went to see it. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, the sun a pale wafer in a watercolor sky. She wore a plain wool walking dress and stout boots, ignoring the disapproval in her sister-in-law's face when they passed in the hall. Honoria, dressed for morning calls in a confection of lace and lilac silk, had raised a single, perfect eyebrow. "An early start, sister? Off to survey your new domain?" The words were light. The tone was not. Philippa had simply inclined her head and continued on her way. The path to the walled garden was overgrown. The gardeners, understaffed and overworked, focused their efforts on the parts of the estate visible to guests. This far quadrant was forgotten. The gate, its green paint flaking, groaned on its hinges. Inside, the garden was a beautiful wreck. Old roses, unpruned for a generation, had grown into monstrous, thorny thickets, their late blooms scattered like drops of blood. Herbs had gone to seed and spread in fragrant, chaotic carpets. In the center of it all stood the glass house. It was worse than she had imagined, and more magnificent. The iron frame, though rusted, was elegantly wrought, with soaring arches and delicate finials that spoke of a grander, more optimistic age. But more than half the glass was gone, shattered into a glittering carpet on the floor, now mixed with dirt and weeds. Ivy had crawled up the iron ribs, its tendrils thick as a man's wrist, forcing its way through the remaining panes and buckling the frame in places. Inside, a small, wild ecosystem had taken root. Ferns grew in the damp corners, and a single, defiant rowan tree had sprouted from a crack in the flagstones, its thin trunk reaching for the broken roof. She stepped inside, her boots crunching on the debris. The air was still and damp, smelling of wet earth, rust, and decay. It did not feel like a place of defeat. It felt like a place of profound quiet, a place outside the judgment of the main house. She ran a gloved hand over the pitted ironwork. It was solid. The foundation seemed sound. It was not a hopeless case. It was a project. A vast, difficult, and expensive project. Her dowry had been absorbed by the estate's general accounts, a fact Alistair had made clear. What remained to her was a small personal allowance, barely enough for gowns and gloves, let alone the restoration of a structure this size. A sound made her turn. An old man stood in the doorway, his back bent like a question mark. He held a clay pipe in one gnarled hand and a pair of shears in the other. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue. It was Silas, the head gardener, who had been at Wren Court since he was a boy. "Your Grace," he said, his voice a low rumble. He did not seem surprised to see her. "Come to look at the Duke's gift." It was not a question. "I have, Silas," she replied. "What do you think of it?" He took a long pull from his pipe, his eyes scanning the ruin with an expert's appraisal. "I think," he said slowly, "that my grandfather helped build it, and my father helped heat the boilers, and I watched the great storm take the roof off it. It's got good bones, this place, but it's a heartache to look at now." "Can it be repaired?" He considered this, his gaze moving from the buckled frame to the shattered floor. "Anything can be repaired, Your Grace, if a person has the will, and the coin." He looked at her, and in his pale eyes she saw not pity, but a flicker of something else, a shared understanding of neglected things. "I may have the will," Philippa said quietly. "The coin is another matter." "Aye," he nodded. "That's always the way of it." She walked the length of the structure, Silas following at a respectful distance. She saw the remnants of the old heating system, a complex network of cast iron pipes connected to a boiler house outside. She saw the stone planting beds, now filled with rubble but still intact. She saw the cistern for collecting rainwater. Her father, for all his mercantile success, had been a passionate amateur botanist. Their house outside Bristol had a modest but meticulously maintained conservatory. She had spent her childhood there, learning the names of plants, the science of soil and light, the patient art of cultivation. She knew more than how to arrange flowers in a vase. She knew how to make things grow. She stopped and looked up at the sky through the broken arches. "I have some money of my own," she said, more to herself than to Silas. "From my mother. Not much. But it might be enough to begin." "To begin what, Your Grace?" Silas asked, his voice gentle. Philippa turned to him, and for the first time since her arrival at Wren Court, she felt a genuine spark of something that was not endurance, not duty, but nascent joy. "To begin," she said, "by clearing the glass." The work began in secret. Philippa told no one save Bess, who helped her change into old, patched gowns that would not be missed. Each morning, after a solitary breakfast, she would walk to the walled garden. Silas, without being asked, had cleared a path for her. He had 2 young lads, grandsons of his, come to help. They worked for hours, painstakingly removing the shards of broken glass, loading them into a wheelbarrow, and piling them in a discreet corner behind the boiler house. They pulled the ivy from the iron frame, the thick, stubborn roots leaving pale scars on the metal. Philippa worked alongside them. At first, the boys were shy, and Silas was deferential, but the shared labor broke down the barriers of rank. They saw the Duchess, with her fine, soft hands, learning to handle a trowel, her brow furrowed in concentration as she levered a stubborn root from the earth. They saw her wince when a thorn bit into her palm, and they saw her wrap it in her handkerchief and carry on. She was not playing at being a gardener. She was working. By the end of the first month, the frame was clear of ivy, and the floor was swept clean of glass and debris. The rowan trees she left, a lone sentinel in the center. The structure looked even more skeletal now, but it was a clean skeleton. A beginning. Philippa used her pin money to pay the boys a few extra shillings a week. It was a pittance, but it was hers to give. She spent her evenings not in the drawing room, where Honoria held court and Alastair sat silently with his ledgers, but in the Wren Court library. It was a magnificent, neglected room, filled with the accumulated knowledge of centuries. She began searching for the estate records, looking for plans of the glass house. What she found was something better. Tucked away on a high shelf, covered in a fine layer of dust, were a dozen leather-bound journals. They were the garden diaries of Alistair's grandmother, Lady Beatrice Blackwood. Philippa took them back to her room, one by one. Lady Beatrice, it turned out, had been a formidable botanist. Her journals were filled with exquisite, detailed drawings of plants, with notes on cross-pollination, on soil composition, on the particular challenges of growing exotic species in the unpredictable climate of the marches. And she had a passion for one thing above all others: orchids. The journals described a collection that had been famous throughout England. Delicate, otherworldly blooms from the Americas and the Far East, nurtured in the carefully controlled climate of the glasshouse.
Lady Beatrice wrote of constructing special shaded beds, of mastering the precise balance of heat and humidity required to make them flower. She wrote of selling rare specimens to collectors in London, the income from which had paid for the new slate roof on the east wing. Here was the answer. It was not just a hobby. It had been a business. A respectable, genteel, and profitable enterprise. A blueprint. Philippa took the measurements of the glasshouse and sent a letter, along with a small draft from her personal account, to a glassworks in Birmingham her father had once done business with. She calculated the exact number of panes she would need to repair the south-facing roof, the one most crucial for winter light. It would exhaust nearly all of her private funds. It was a tremendous risk. If it failed, she would have nothing left. When the wagon arrived from the glassworks a month later, it caused a minor stir. Alistair was away in London, dealing with his creditors. It was Honoria who intercepted the delivery. Philippa, summoned from the garden, found her sister-in-law standing beside the cart, upon which stacks of new glass panes were carefully packed in straw. "Philippa," Honoria said, her voice dangerously sweet, "what is the meaning of this? The steward tells me this is a considerable expense." "It is my expense," Philippa answered calmly, her heart beating a little faster. "Paid for from my own account." "Your own account?" Honoria's laugh was like the tinkle of ice in a glass. "My dear, your funds are for bonnets and charity, not for architectural follies. Alistair will be furious." "The Duke gave me the glass house," Philippa said, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "I presume he intended for me to do something with it. Or was it merely to stand as a monument to my idleness?" The shot landed. A faint flush touched Honoria's cheeks. She had underestimated the quiet woman she thought of as the merchant's daughter. "You are being insolent." "I am being practical," Philippa corrected her. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She turned to the driver and Silas, who was hovering anxiously nearby. "Let us begin unloading." For the first time, Honoria was left without a reply. She watched, her lips a thin line of displeasure, as her brother's wife directed the careful work of moving the new glass into the walled garden. The battle had been a small one, but Philippa felt as if she had won a war. She had defended her small territory. The glazing was slow, painstaking work. Silas, it turned out, had a head for heights and a steady hand. He taught Philippa how to mix the putty, how to set the panes against the iron frame, how to fix them in place with tiny metal clips. They worked through the crisp days of late autumn, the sun warm on their backs. The roof began to grow, pane by pane, a shield of clear glass against the sky. As the final section was put into place, a sudden shower of rain began to fall. Inside the glass house, they watched the drops bead and run down the new panes, the sound a gentle drumming. The air inside was dry and protected. It was a house again. That evening, Alistair returned. Philippa saw the lights of his carriage sweeping up the drive from her window. She felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach.
Honoria would have gone to him immediately, her tale of Philippa's profligacy and insolence already prepared. She braced herself for a summons, for a cold, cutting reprimand in his study. But the summons never came. She saw him at dinner. He was tired from his journey, his face etched with worry. He spoke little, directing his conversation to his sister and the estate steward. He did not mention the glass, or the glass house. He did not, in fact, seem to notice Philippa at all. The silence was, in its way, more unnerving than an argument. It was as if her grand project, the focus of her entire existence for the past 3 months, was too insignificant to even warrant a comment. It was a hobby. It was beneath his notice. That night she found one of Lady Beatrice's journals, open to a page with a stunning watercolor of a white orchid, its petals streaked with the faintest lilac. Phalaenopsis amabilis, the moon orchid. Beneath it, Beatrice had written, "They require the greatest care. They will not be commanded. They bloom only when all conditions are precisely met. But their beauty, when it comes, is a reward for patience." Philippa traced the delicate lines of the drawing with her finger. She would be patient. Winter settled over Wren Court, a season of gray skies and biting winds. Inside the newly glazed portion of the glass house, a fragile world was coming to life. Silas had managed to repair a section of the old heating pipes, and a small, efficient stove in the boiler house now kept the frost at bay. Philippa had used the last of her money to buy soil, pots, and a few precious dormant orchid tubers from a specialist nursery in London. She followed Lady Beatrice's instructions to the letter, mixing the growing medium from charcoal, moss, and bark, ensuring perfect drainage, and misting the plants with rainwater collected in the old cistern. It was a quiet, monastic life. She would rise early, dress in her work clothes, and spend the morning in the warmth and humid air of the glass house. The world outside, the formal dinners, the stilted conversations, Honoria's subtle barbs, seemed to fall away the moment she stepped through the door. Here she was not the duchess, the transactional bride. She was a creator, a nurturer. She watched over her small, unpromising collection of roots and bulbs with the focus of a scientist and the hope of a supplicant. Alistair remained a distant, formidable presence. She knew the estate's finances were worsening. She overheard scraps of conversation between him and the steward, a tenant farm failing, a shipment of wool fetching a lower price than expected. He grew thinner, the lines around his eyes deepening. He spent his days riding the estate, his evenings locked in his study with the ledgers. Once, passing the library late at night, she saw him through the half-open door. He was standing by the window, not looking out, but staring at his own reflection in the dark glass, his expression one of profound, weary solitude. She felt a pang of something she could not name, not pity, precisely, but a sense of shared imprisonment. He was as trapped by Wren Court as she was. One cold February morning, she saw it, a single green shoot, pale and tender, pushing its way up from one of the orchid pots. It was no thicker than a thread, but it was life. She knelt, her breath catching in her throat, and stared at it as if it were a miracle. Within a week, there were others. The dormant, ugly tubers were waking up. The first blooms opened in early April, a week before their 3rd anniversary. They were not the grand moon orchids of Beatrice's paintings, but a smaller, hardier species. 3 waxy, star-shaped flowers of a deep, velvety crimson, perched on a slender stem. Philippa touched a petal with the tip of her finger. It was flawless. Bess was the first to see them. She brought Philippa her morning tea and found her mistress simply standing before the pot, a slow, genuine smile on her face. It was a sight so rare that the maid stopped in the doorway. "Oh, Your Grace," she breathed. "They're beautiful." "They are, aren't they?" Philippa said, her voice soft. That evening, she cut one of the stems. She placed the 3 crimson flowers in a small crystal vase and, on a sudden impulse, had Bess place it not in her own rooms, but on the small table beside Alistair's customary chair in the library. She did not know why she did it. It was not a peace offering, nor a cry for attention. It was simply a statement of fact. This is what I have been doing. This is what I have made. She watched him from a distance when he entered the library before dinner. He walked to the fireplace, his mind clearly on other matters. Then he stopped. He had seen it. He moved closer to the table, his tall frame bending slightly. He looked at the flower for a long time. He did not touch it. His face was unreadable. When Honoria swept into the room, full of chatter about a letter she had received, he straightened up and turned away, the moment broken. But he had seen it, and he had not dismissed it. The orchids flourished. The spring sun, magnified by the glass, filled the space with a warm, bright light. More and more plants began to send up flower spikes. Philippa, armed with Lady Beatrice's journals, made a connection. A Mr. Clement Fairfax, a respected botanist and dealer in London, who was mentioned several times in the diaries, was still in business, though now run by his son. She wrote to him, describing the collection she was beginning to cultivate, mentioning Lady Beatrice's name. The reply was swift and enthusiastic. The younger Mr. Fairfax remembered his father speaking of the Wren Court orchids. He expressed a keen interest in acquiring any rare specimens, should the Duchess be willing to part with them. He named prices that made Philippa's breath catch. A single, perfect specimen of a certain species could fetch more than the annual rent from their largest tenant farm. A new plan began to form, bolder than any she had yet conceived. This would not be a hobby. It would not be a source of pin money. It would be a business, a lifeline. As her confidence grew, so did Honoria's resentment. She took to walking down to the walled garden, her silk skirts rustling in protest against the gravel path. She would stand in the doorway of the glasshouse, a scented handkerchief held to her nose, as if to ward off the smell of honest dirt. "Still playing with your flowers, Philippa?" she asked one afternoon, her eyes scanning the rows of thriving plants. "It is a charming diversion, but the estate has real problems. Alistair is at his wit's end. There is talk of selling the North Woods." The North Woods. 200 acres of ancient oak, a part of the Blackwood estate for centuries. The thought was like a physical blow. "I am aware of the estate's difficulties," Philippa said, her hands busy repotting a small seedling. "Are you?" Honoria's voice was sharp. "You hide yourself away in this hothouse. You have no idea of the pressure he is under. He needs a duchess who can run a household, who can charm influential people, who can secure a proper heir. Not one who smells of soil and prefers the company of plants to people." Philippa set down her pot and slowly rose to her feet. She wiped her hands on her apron, her gaze steady. "And which of those things have you accomplished for him, Honoria? You have run this household into debt with your endless entertainments. Your influential friends offer sympathy, but not credit. And for all your efforts, you have failed to secure him a more suitable wife than me." The silence in the glasshouse was absolute, broken only by the buzzing of a bee against a pane. Honoria's face was pale with fury. She had, for years, been the undisputed mistress of Wren Court, first for her widowed father, then for her bachelor brother. Philippa's arrival had been an inconvenience. Her quiet refusal to be cowed was an insurrection. "You will regret that," Honoria whispered, and turned, her skirts swirling around her as she swept out of the glasshouse. Philippa's hands were trembling, but she did not feel regret. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of clarity. The lines were drawn. The crisis came a month later. A letter arrived from London. The bank that held the largest mortgage on Wren Court had failed. The debt had been sold to a new consortium, one less patient, less inclined to respect the heritage of a ducal name. They were calling in the note. The sum required was astronomical. They had 3 months to produce it, or the estate would be forfeit. The news fell like an axe on the household. The servants whispered in the corridors, their faces etched with fear for their futures. Honoria took to her bed with smelling salts and a migraine. Alistair locked himself in his study for 2 days. When he emerged, he looked like a man who had not slept in a year. He called a meeting with his steward in the dining room. Philippa, passing the door, heard the steward's despairing voice. "Your Grace, there is nothing left to sell that would touch a sum of this magnitude, not without breaking up the estate entirely. The woods, the tenant farms, it would be the end of Wren Court." Philippa walked back to her rooms, her mind racing. She went to her writing desk and pulled out her correspondence with Mr. Fairfax. She had been cultivating a handful of the rarest orchids from Lady Beatrice's collection, including 3 healthy specimens of the legendary Paphiopedilum Rothschildianum, a spectacular, multi-flowered lady slipper orchid that was thought to be nearly extinct in the wild. In his last letter, Mr. Fairfax had hinted that a collector, a wealthy industrialist, would pay a king's ransom for a flowering plant. It was an audacious gamble. Everything depended on the plant's bloomin', on them being perfect, and on getting them to London safely. She wrote a careful, urgent letter to Mr. Fairfax, including a precise drawing of the developing flower spikes. She sent it with a trusted groom, telling him to ride as if his life depended on it. The next 2 months were a blur of agonizing tension. Philippa lived in the glasshouse, tending to the precious plants as if they were royal infants. She monitored the temperature, the humidity, the light. She protected them from drafts and pests. She watched the flower buds swell, slowly, day by agonizing day. Outside the glass walls, the mood in the great house grew darker. Alistair was a ghost, striding through the halls with a face of granite. He did not speak to her. He did not seem to see her. He was consumed by the impending ruin of his world. Mr. Fairfax's reply was all she had hoped for. The industrialist was interested. The price he was willing to pay was staggering. It would not clear the entire debt, but it would be enough to satisfy the creditors and buy them time, precious, vital time. He would come himself, with a specially designed carriage, to collect the plants the moment they were in full bloom. The day the first flower on the Rothschildianum began to unfurl its striped petals and long, elegant tendrils, Philippa felt a wave of dizziness so intense she had to grip the edge of a planting table. It was happening. It was real. 2 weeks later, all 3 plants were in spectacular, perfect bloom. They were magnificent, more beautiful than even Beatrice's paintings had suggested. That same morning, a fine enclosed carriage, with Mr. Fairfax's name discreetly painted on the side, rolled up the gravel drive of Wren Court. The timing was dramatic. Alistair was in the hall, preparing to ride to his solicitor in Shrewsbury for what he clearly believed was a final, hopeless meeting. He saw the carriage, saw the well-dressed man who stepped out, and his brow furrowed in confusion. Mr. Fairfax, a neat, businesslike man with intelligent eyes, introduced himself. "Your Grace, I am Clement Fairfax. I am here by appointment with the Duchess." Alistair turned his head and looked at Philippa, who had just entered the hall from the garden door. She was wearing her plain work dress, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. For the first time, he seemed to be truly seeing her, as if she were a stranger he was struggling to place. "The Duchess," he repeated, his voice hollow. "Indeed," Philippa said, her own voice remarkably steady. She stepped forward. Mr. Fairfax, welcome to Wren Court. If you will follow me, I believe you will find the specimens are ready." She led the way, leaving Alistair and a dumbfounded Honoria standing in the great hall. Mr. Fairfax's gasp of admiration when he saw the orchids was all the confirmation she needed. The plants were carefully packed into padded crates and loaded into the carriage. Mr. Fairfax handed Philippa a heavy envelope. Inside was a bank draft, drawn on a London bank for the agreed-upon sum. She held it in her hands. It felt impossibly heavy. A slip of paper that weighed as much as a forest, as much as a future. She walked back to the main house, her boots echoing in the sudden silence. She found Alistair in his study. He was not at his desk. He was standing by the window, in the exact same spot she had seen him that night, staring at his own dark reflection. She did not speak. She simply walked to his desk and placed the bank draft on the polished mahogany surface, directly on top of a stack of threatening letters from the creditors. He turned slowly. His eyes went from her face to the draft on the desk. He picked it up. His hand, she noticed, was not quite steady. He read the name of the bank, the name of the payee, the Duke of Wren Court, and the amount. He read it twice. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. "It is the proceeds from the sale of 3 orchid plants," Philippa said. Her own voice was quiet, devoid of triumph. She was suddenly, bone-deeply, tired. "From the glass house." He stared at the paper, then back at her. The carefully constructed walls of his composure, the cold armor he had worn for 3 years, seemed to crack. He could not reconcile it. The woman he had dismissed, the marriage he had scorned, the insulting gift of a ruin. It all rearranged itself in his mind into a new, incomprehensible pattern. He saw the smudged dirt on her cheek, the calluses on her hands that he had never noticed. He saw the quiet competence, the fierce, hidden industry. He had given her a ruin, and she had built a rescue. "Philippa," he said, and her name sounded strange in his mouth, as if he had never truly spoken it before. He took a step towards her, the bank draft still clutched in his hand. I do not understand." "There is nothing to understand," she said, turning to leave. "I did what was necessary." "Wait," his voice stopped her at the door. It was no longer the command of a duke, but a plea. "Please, do not go." That evening he came to the glass house. The sun had set, and the space was filled with a soft gray twilight. Philippa was there, methodically watering her remaining plants, the familiar ritual a comfort in the emotional tumult of the day. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint, spicy perfume of the orchids. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her. He had changed from his riding clothes into a simple coat and breeches. In the dim light, he looked younger, less formidable, stripped of his ducal authority. He looked like a man lost. "They told me I would find you here," he said. His voice was quiet, absorbed by the vast glass-roofed space. Philippa did not turn around. She continued her work, her movements precise and unhurried. "The estate is safe for now," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." He walked further into the glass house, his boots making a soft sound on the flagstones. He stopped beside the empty space where the 3 prized orchids had stood. "Because of this. Because of you." She finally straightened and faced him. "I did it for Wren Court," she said. She would not give him the satisfaction of thinking she had done it for him. "Did you?" he asked, and his gray eyes searched her face. "Or did you do it to prove me wrong?" The question was so direct, so honest, that it took her by surprise. "Perhaps," she admitted, her gaze unwavering. "Perhaps I did both." He nodded slowly, accepting it. He looked around the transformed space, The clean glass, the ordered rows of plants, the signs of patient, relentless work everywhere. He looked at the slender rowan tree in the center, now in leaf. "I gave you this place as an insult," he said, his voice low and ragged with a shame she had never thought to hear from him. "I meant it to be a cage, a place to forget you." "I know," she said. "I was wrong," he said. The two words hung in the warm air between them, simple and devastating. He took a step closer. "I have been wrong about everything. About you." He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. 3 years ago, I made a bargain. I needed your father's money to save this place. I treated you as part of that transaction. I have been a brute and a fool." Philippa remained silent. She had dreamed of hearing such words, but now that they were here, they felt inadequate to heal the long, cold years of neglect. "I owe you an explanation," he went on, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "Not an excuse, an explanation. Before you, there was another engagement. It was not a love match, not on my side, but I thought there was respect, friendship. Her name was Estella. Her family was not well situated. I believed I was offering her security, a life of comfort. A week before the wedding, I discovered she had been selling information about my financial troubles to my rivals. She and her father planned to ruin me, to buy Wren Court for themselves from the ashes. She told me, when I confronted her, that love was a fiction for poets, that all marriage was a transaction, and she had simply negotiated a better one." He finally looked at Philippa, and in his eyes she saw the raw, unhealed wound. "I built a wall around myself after that," he whispered. "I swore I would never be such a fool again. I made my heart a fortress. When my father died, and the debts were worse than I feared, your father made his proposal. Another transaction. I accepted, and I visited my old pain on you. I saw Estella in you. I saw a bargain, and I was determined to be the one who felt nothing, who risked nothing." He fell silent. The story settled in the quiet of the glasshouse. It did not excuse his cruelty, but it gave it a shape, a history. She could see the man he had been before the betrayal, younger, more trusting, capable of being broken. "I am not her," Philippa said, her voice barely audible. "No," he said, his throat tight. "You are not. You are the woman who took the most broken thing I owned and used it to save everything I have. You are the woman who worked in silence, who asked for nothing, who endured my coldness and my sister's malice, and still, you created this." He gestured around the glasshouse, at the impossible beauty she had cultivated from neglect. He closed the remaining distance between them. He reached out, not to touch her face or her arm, but to gently take her hand. He turned it over and looked at her palm, at the calluses and the small faded scar from a thorn. He traced the lines with his thumb, his touch hesitant, reverent. "Forgive me, Philippa," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. "I do not deserve it, but I ask for it all the same." Her heart, so long guarded, so carefully shielded, felt a painful, thawing crack. She did not pull her hand away. In the dimming light of the glasshouse she had rebuilt, surrounded by the life she had coaxed from dormant things, she looked at her husband, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not a duke, but a man. A man as broken and in need of repair as the ruin he had given her. And she thought of Lady Beatrice's words. "They will not be commanded. They bloom only when all conditions are precisely met."
Patience, she had written. The reward for patience. The bank draft bought them time, but the work of saving Wren Court had only just begun. The change, when it came, was not a sudden flood, but a slow, turning tide. It began the morning after Alistair's confession. At breakfast, for the first time, he did not sit at the far end of the long table. He took the chair beside hers. Honoria, descending late, stopped dead at the sight, her carefully composed face a mask of disbelief. "Good morning, sister," Alistair said, his tone mild, but with a new, underlying firmness. "Philippa was just telling me about her plans for expanding the glasshouse." Honoria's gaze flickered between them. The united front was unmistakable. "How industrious," she managed, taking her seat. The social ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she was struggling to find her balance. After breakfast, Alistair asked Philippa to join him in the study. The room had always been his sanctuary, a symbol of his power and his burdens. He gestured for her to sit, not in the visitor's chair opposite the desk, but in the one beside it. He spread the estate ledgers on the polished surface. "I would like you to look at these," he said. It was not a command. It was a request. "I have been managing this alone for too long. I have been managing it badly. Your father was a brilliant man of business. I suspect his daughter is as well." And so began their new partnership. They bent their heads over the columns of figures, the long lists of expenses, and the dwindling sources of income. Philippa's mind, sharp and practical, saw things he had missed, small extravagances that could be cut, efficiencies that could be made. She pointed out that the cost of maintaining Honoria's London townhouse for the season was more than the wages for all the estate gardeners combined. A week later, Honoria's townhouse was quietly let to a wealthy tenant. Honoria herself, faced with the choice of a drastically reduced London life or remaining at Wren Court under a new regime, chose a third option, a long, strategic visit to a cousin in Bath. Her departure was dignified, but it was a retreat. The reign of Lady Honoria Blackwood was over. With the immediate threat of the creditors gone, Alistair and Philippa focused on the future. The orchid business, once a secret project, became the centerpiece of their strategy. Alistair invested estate funds in restoring the rest of the glasshouse, in rebuilding the old boiler system to Lady Beatrice's original specifications. He listened with genuine interest and respect as Philippa explained the complex needs of the different species, her knowledge deep and assured. He began to spend more and more time there, not advising but learning. He learned the names of the plants. He learned to mix the growing medium, his large, capable hands surprisingly gentle. They worked side by side, often in comfortable silence, the shared task a bridge across the chasm that had separated them. In the warm, humid air of the glasshouse, they began to build a marriage. He learned her habits, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the small, pleased smile she had when a new leaf unfurled. She learned his, the way the tension in his shoulders eased when he entered the glasshouse, the rare, quiet laugh that escaped him when one of them made a clumsy mistake. One afternoon, as they were working, he stopped and looked at her. "I never asked you," he said, "about your father, about your home. I know nothing of your life before you came here." And so she told him. She spoke of her childhood, of a quiet, scholarly father who loved books and plants more than society. She told him about her mother, who had died when she was young, and about her own lonely, studious upbringing. She spoke of her love for the conservatory at their home, a place of light and life. She did not speak with bitterness, but with a simple, factual clarity. He listened, his face still and attentive, and she knew he was hearing not just the words, but all the years of silence that lay behind them. When she finished, he reached across the planting table and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "He told me you were resilient," Alistair said quietly. "Your father.
when we finalized the arrangement. He said, "My daughter is not fragile. She endures." I thought it was a strange thing to say. I understand now. "I do not want to just endure," Philippa said, her voice soft but firm. "I want to live." "I know," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "And I want to live with you." That autumn, on their 4th anniversary, he did not hold a grand party. Instead, he led her down the path to the walled garden just as dusk was falling. He had arranged for lanterns to be lit inside the glass house, and their soft golden light glowed through the panes, a beacon in the twilight. Inside, a table had been set for two, with a simple dinner and a bottle of wine. In the center of the table was a small velvet box. "Alistair," she began, but he silenced her with a gentle smile. "It is not a ruin this time," he said. He opened the box. Inside, on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay a pair of earrings. They were exquisite, fashioned from platinum in the shape of orchid blossoms, with a single, perfect diamond shimmering at the heart of each. They were not the ostentatious Blackwood diamonds. They were delicate, personal, and beautiful. "I had them made," he said. "I wanted you to have something that was yours, something that grew from this place, just as you did." She allowed him to fasten them for her, his fingers warm against her skin. The cool weight of them against her neck felt like a promise. They ate their meal, talking and laughing quietly, the sound of their voices soft in the vast, beautiful space she had reclaimed. Later, he took her hand and led her to the center of the glass house, to the spot where the rowan tree stood, its leaves now turning to gold. "I love you, Philippa," he said, his voice clear and steady in the lantern light. "I know I am late in saying it. I know I have much to atone for. But I love you, with everything that I am." Tears she had refused to shed in grief and humiliation now pricked her eyes in joy. She raised her hand to his face, her fingers tracing the stern line of his jaw. "And I," she said, her voice catching, "have, against all my better judgment, come to love you too, Alistair." His kiss was not the hesitant, questioning touch of before. It was a confirmation, a homecoming. In the heart of the ruin he had given her, surrounded by the life they were now building together, Philippa, Duchess of Wren Court, was finally, truly, home. 10 years later, the Wren Court orchids were famous throughout Europe. The glass house, now fully restored and expanded, was a place of pilgrimage for botanists and a source of steady, considerable profit for the estate. The North Woods were safe. The tenant farms were thriving. The Blackwood name, once associated with decline, was now a byword for innovation and resilience. On a bright June afternoon, Philippa sat on a bench inside the great glass house, a book lying open but unread in her lap. The air was warm and fragrant. Around her, orchids of every shape and color bloomed in profusion. She was no longer the pale, silent girl who had arrived at Wren Court a decade before. There was a quiet confidence in her bearing, a warmth in her smile. A small boy with his father's serious gray eyes and a shock of dark hair came running down the central path, his boots making a cheerful clatter on the flagstones. He was clutching a slightly squashed caterpillar in his fist. "Mama," he said, holding it out for her inspection. "Look, he is going to turn into a butterfly." Philippa smiled and examined the offering with appropriate gravity. "So he is, Leo. You must put him back on a leaf so he can do his work." As the boy, satisfied, trotted off to return the caterpillar to its rightful home, Alistair came and sat beside her. He took her hand, the gesture as natural to him now as breathing. The lines of worry had softened on his face over the years, replaced by a settled contentment. "Still hiding in your glass house?" he teased gently. "It is no longer a hiding place," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. It is the heart of the house. He was silent for a moment, his gaze traveling over the vibrant, flourishing world she had built. I was looking at the old ledgers this morning, he said, from before you came. I was a desperate man, and a blind one. We were both blind, she said, to each other. Perhaps, he allowed, but you were the one who taught me how to see. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son as he carefully placed the caterpillar on a broad green leaf. The sun streamed through the glass roof, dappling the flagstones with light. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the delicate, translucent petals of a nearby orchid, and the simple gold band on Philippa's finger. It was a place of peace, a place of growth, a place earned through patience and hard work. He had given her a ruin, a symbol of a broken marriage. She had given him back a future. And together, in the wreckage, they had found a way to let the light in.